So there's a very wonderful hadith of Zayd radiallahu anhu, right? And so the Prophet ﷺ, he tells Zayd to go do a task for him. He says, Zayd, go out and do this for me. Okay? And so Zayd radiallahu anhu goes out, and the Prophet ﷺ is waiting for him, and waiting for him, and waiting for him. Okay? And Zayd doesn't come back. So what does the Prophet ﷺ do? He goes out, and he sees that Zayd radiallahu anhu is playing with the other kids. Okay? So he didn't listen to the Messenger of Allah, and now he's playing with other kids. So what did the Prophet ﷺ do? Does anybody know what he did? Anybody notice? Did he yell at him? What did he do? He said, I'm the Messenger of Allah, how dare you? Leave this community now. No? Huh. What? He didn't play. He, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he smiled at him from a distance, and he just looked at him, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited. You know how sometimes our parents used to just give us that look? Well, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's look was not a stern look, it was a look of smiling. Right? And so then he asked him very politely, he says, "O Zayd, have you done what I asked you to do?" And so Zayd radiallahu anhu, immediately he became ashamed, you know, and he said, "No, Rasulullah, I'm going to go do it right now." Right? Zayd radiallahu anhu narrates this much later. Right? He narrates this hadith much later because he says, that day the Prophet, I did something wrong, the Prophet smiled at me, I still did what I had to do, but he didn't get mad at me. The Prophet ﷺ realized that he's a kid. He's going to want to play with other kids. Okay? You know, it's impossible for you to tell your child you cannot play video games whatsoever, ever. If you're even at your friend's house, if they're watching a movie, you have to go like this. You know, the Prophet ﷺ understood that, like, when you set rules, when you set expectations, it has to be age appropriate. Okay? As far as a set time, there's no research saying that, you know, it has to be 1 hour or so on. My point actually is that, and I actually liked your answers. Especially the idea of just having it out in the open, because that way it's not really a fight. And then when the screen time is done, you can actually enjoy and you're not exhausted, because a lot of parents just exhaust themselves trying to chase after these rules, one rule after the other, and before you know it, your kids growing up and all they remember is rules and my parents chasing after me after these rules which I never followed, and that's their only memories, unfortunately. Okay, how we restrict or monitor content. A lot of people said Circle. There's 2 other apps that I actually recommend, right? So one is called it's called K9 Browser. So it's a fairly cheap app, and that you actually get to you have a lot of options as far as what to restrict and so on. It doesn't work very well on the phone, unfortunately, but it works very well on like laptops, iPads, so on. And then as far as phones, the only one that I found good was an app called Kids Place. Kids Place. And the good thing about this app is no matter what smartphone you have, no matter what type of Android phone, I don't know if it works for iPhone, you get to pick what apps are on there. So if you're okay with the child using WhatsApp and obviously email and something, but you don't want them using certain web browsers or YouTube, you can put only the apps that they use on there. Now, I take a little bit of a conservative approach to this, about putting these restrictions on. And the reason for that is because, unfortunately, we've seen a rise in the rate of pornography addiction. Okay? And the average age of exposure now, and may Allah Azza wa Jal protect us and our families, but the average age of exposure to pornography has gone down to about 8 or 9 years old. 8 or 9 years old. And the majority of the time it's accidental. The majority of the times the child is just browsing, and then it turns into an addiction. Slowly, it turns into an addiction, unfortunately. So I would honestly rather have parents take a little bit of conservative approach with this in particular and start that out at a young age. If it's at an older age and you say, SubhanAllah, I haven't put these restrictions on, I don't know if my son is watching, my teenage son, or sometimes even teenage daughter is watching this inappropriate material, right? What I would say to parents is approach your children with this idea that, listen, if you're struggling with something and you need help, there's nothing you're going to say to me which I'm going to get mad about, but if you need something, like you need me to put a password on your computer or something, I'll do it. Don't let them be so scared of you that they would rather fall into that sin than face, your anger, right? I've had numerous teenagers and young youth, unfortunately, and some of them, have memorized the Quran. Some of them are students of knowledge. Some of them are doctors, engineers, and so on, which have said that, for 15 years, I've been struggling with this addiction. And I wish I could go to my parents, but I was either too embarrassed, or there was never an opportunity, or that would just make things worse. But if I had a chance, I would have gone to my parents and said right then and there, this is a struggle, help me out. And so I hope that we can kind of make this policy that, listen, if you're struggling, no questions asked, just come to us, right? I'm going to talk just in a minute about a little bit of neuroscience. I do that a lot, as to why certain things affect our youth, especially age 10 and onwards, and why they do things which we're like, did you think before you did that, right? SubhanAllah, when it comes to social media, in psychology, we're actually right now debating whether we're going to include a diagnosis known as internet addiction, right? So I worked in chemical dependency, I worked in the Center for Addiction Medicine at a few different hospitals, and we have gambling addiction, we have shopping addiction, we have, so there's a debate, and more than likely, we are going to make this diagnosis because it's becoming more and more of a problem, internet addiction, okay? What happens to youth's brain when they are exposed constantly to this internet, right? So they did a study in UCLA where they found, and what they did was they had these youth on social media, on Facebook, on this, and they hooked them up to what's known as a functional MRI. A functional MRI basically looks at how the brain is working, the activities of the brain, right? So there's structural MRIs which look at how the structure of the brain changes, and there's functional MRIs which look at how brain patterns and brain activity happens. What they found is very interesting. They found that when teenagers are on something like Facebook, right, and they see if they put their photo up, right, so they had teenagers put their photos up, and the more likes they got, there was an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. This is the area of the brain which is at the core of addiction. Okay, and this will just light up. So the same pleasure that a heroin addict gets, okay, our kids were getting the same pleasure with the amount of likes. Can you imagine that? The same area of the brain that somebody shooting up heroin or alcohol addiction or cannabis addiction, the same area of the brain just for Facebook likes, okay? And not only that, they also found that at that point, kids had no filter. The only reason they would like a photo, like content, is if other people liked it. So it didn't matter what the content was. So they showed them, very bad images. They showed them images of alcohol. They showed them images of It didn't matter. The only thing was if other people liked it, I'm going to like it. My morals go away. It doesn't matter. If other people like it, I'm going to like it. And this is, unfortunately, some of the, and we'll discuss this in just a second, one of the areas of the brain which fully hasn't developed is this ability to think before you act, not fall into peer pressure. Okay, so this area of the brain was called the nucleus accumbens. There's another area of the brain, and I'm sharing this for a specific reason. I'm sharing this for a reason that when we get frustrated with our kids, know that this is a special time in their development, right? Puberty onwards. Allah Azza wa Jal has created our brain in just a phenomenal manner. Our brain is plastic. What I mean by that is it's constantly changing. And certain things remain, certain things don't. I have a friend who has a very, very challenging disease known as schizophrenia. And this is a full-blown disease where you lose touch of reality. Unfortunately, it was really unfortunate because we went to college together. We used to play basketball together. One day he was driving, and while he's driving his car, he thinks that his kneecaps are broken. So he walks into the hospital, in the emergency room, and he says, listen, somebody needs to help me because my kneecaps are broken. And so they immediately recognized that, okay, there's something wrong with this. Since then, I make dua for him and his family. He's been in nursing homes for the last 15 years. And one interesting thing, my point is that this person has lost all touch of reality. When he contacted me, he said, Usman, I contact you because I want to tell you something. I said, what is it? He said, I just found out that you are Khidr alayhi salam, and my father is Fir'aun, and I am Musa, and I need to tell you this. A complete loss of reality. And when I visited him, every time I go to Chicago, I try to make it a point to visit him. I had asked him, I said, your mother told me that you memorized the Quran, right? And so he said, yes. I said, can I test you? And so he said, sure. And so I just picked some random places in the Quran, And I said, finish this ayah. I kid you not, perfection, mashallah. Like that part of the brain which had memorized the Quran was not affected. Well, I started crying after this, just thinking how Allah has created this brain where this person has lost complete touch of reality, but the Quran was preserved. The Quran was preserved, and may Allah, because this is somebody which we say is ma'soom at this point, right? The pen has been lifted from him, he's not aware of his actions, but Allah Azza wa Jal chose to keep the Quran in his heart and in his brain, so may Allah make that a means for him to go to paradise, inshallah. So subhanAllah, it was just interesting how Allah Azza wa Jal has created this brain, right? So now with children, what happens? There's a few different interesting developments in the brain. We have an area of the brain known as the prefrontal cortex, okay? The prefrontal cortex, Allah Azza wa Jal created this area of the brain, and it develops much later. So the way the brain develops is it actually goes from back to front. So your occipital lobe, these areas, they start to develop first, right? And then your prefrontal cortex. Now some studies have shown that the prefrontal cortex in some cases doesn't develop fully until the age of 25. Till the age of 25. So what does the prefrontal cortex do? The prefrontal cortex basically is that part of the brain, right, which just tells you, hey, listen, this is a bad idea. Think about this first. If you do this, then this is going to happen. Right? How many times have we told our teenagers, didn't you think before you did this? They actually didn't. Because the reality is their brains are still forming. And this is, if any of the kids are like, yes, we have an excuse now. I don't have a prefrontal cortex. So, right? Okay. That's one thing. Right behind the prefrontal cortex, there's the mid-cortex. Yes?
You were saying in some cases it's 25, but what's the common?
What's the common? What's the common? That's a good question. We use like 18, 19. It's right. And again, it's not just purely biological. It's also the way we socialize with our children, right? Usama bin Zayd, radiallahu anhu, he led an entire army at the age of 18. Doesn't that take a lot of thinking, planning ahead? You can't be haphazard. You can't be careless, right? At that. So the Prophet ﷺ, he encouraged and he helped develop that part of the brain. How? Gave him responsibilities. Do you think that was the first time Usama radiallahu anhu was in a leadership position? Do you think the Prophet ﷺ would just say, okay, no experience, nothing like Donald Trump, just go and lead? No, of course not, right? Do you think that's the first time maybe how many times did he fall off a horse before he led the army? How many times did he make mistakes? How many times did the Prophet ﷺ, perhaps coach him and tell him, okay, you made this mistake, what could you have done differently? And so as a child goes through this and starts to learn and make mistakes and learn and so on, and gain these experiences, then their prefrontal cortex starts to develop more and more and more. So it's not just purely biological, but there's our interactions can help with that as well. Does that make sense? Yes. Is there a test? Right now mental health is broke. It's not. The functional MRI machine costs like $1 million plus. One day, inshallah, when we fix the healthcare crisis. No, really, these type of studies can help actually change people's lives. Like something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, a functional MRI machine can catch it like years before any signs show up. So if we're able to catch it years before, we can warn the family, we can help them make arrangements and so on. But no, right now, if there is a test for it, it's at the university level, nobody's going to pay for it. Yeah?
Is it possible for this prefrontal cortex to not develop because of the environmental situation that the kid is provided?
Yes, so we see this a lot in addiction. In addiction, what happens is let's suppose that a child starts smoking cannabis at age 12, and then he moves on to other drugs, and he's still doing this for 10 years, right? Or 20 years or something. You will have a 30-year-old with the decision-making process of a 12-year-old, because that part of, he just never learned that. So yes, unfortunately, it stunts your growth in that area, if that makes sense, right? Because addiction, the way it works is, if I have a challenge, if I have stress, if I have a negative emotion, right? I don't know how to deal with it, so what's the best way to deal with it? Get drunk, get high. And so I've taught my body that this is the only way, right? Instead of learning from our mistakes and so on, right? Okay. Interesting enough, right behind the prefrontal cortex, there is the mid area of the cortex. Now this is actually interesting, right? A lot of parents come to me and they say, I feel like my kid he can't understand other people's viewpoints, right? Why can't he understand that this bothers me? Why can't he understand that it bothers his sister or it bothers his brother or not to do this, right? And so that area of the brain, actually, it's the ability to understand somebody else's perspective, right? And sometimes adults struggle with this as well. Husbands and wives struggle with this as well. How many times can you put yourself in your spouse's shoes and say, you know what, maybe if she said, if she said that to me the way I just said it to her, I would react the same way, right? Children, teenagers, this area of the brain is still developing. So, even the idea of having that type of empathy, having that type of, how would the other person feel about it? That's still being developed. So how do we improve that, right? If we know this about the brain, right? This is not like saying that, okay, that's it, we're all in trouble because our kids have not had fully developed brains. How do we encourage that? This idea of empathy. How do we encourage it? How do we encourage our children to understand how other people are feeling?
Expose them to, less
Okay.
privileged.
Expose them, right? Best way, lead by example, right? And this is gonna sound a little bit tough. I can be blunt as a therapist at times, but how are you with your spouse, right? Are you understanding with your spouse? Do you make excuses for your spouse, right? Do you try and see their perspective? Because then and only then can you teach that to your children. That listen, when you do this, Baba was hurt. When you do this, it hurt Mama's feelings, right? But without that example, it's going to be difficult for them to make the connection because children follow what they see much, much more than what they hear, right? So if you're smoking a pack of cigarettes every day and you tell your child, don't smoke, at a certain age, morally, like children around this age, they start to question everything and they start to have their own sense of morality and they're going to say, wait a minute, all the rules are not meant to be followed. This one seems wrong. I'm not going to follow it because Baba smokes, I'm going to smoke too, right? Okay. So the consequence of this social media, really, I think the biggest consequence is we're raising children, unfortunately, which don't know how to connect with others, which don't know how to have conversations, how to enjoy time with their family, right? And so you'll see this, and unfortunately, adults, we do this too, right? How many of us, when we go home, right, instead of saying salam, instead of spending time with family, we just go right on our phone. That's our relaxation time. And then you see couples or families at the dinner table sometimes, or even out at restaurants. Yeah, so anyway, everybody's just like this, right? I mean, imagine if I did that the whole lecture. I was like, so guys, right? No matter how much interesting information I'm giving, you guys would not feel any type of connection. Sometimes even the language that we use. If I said some people instead of what do you guys think, right? You won't feel as connected to me. Didn't it help when you guys were talking to each other, sharing each other's struggles, sharing each other's ideas and advice, right? Wasn't that a lot more meaningful than just me spitting out random facts? Yes? Our children, unfortunately, because of social media, have lost this, right? So I'm going to give you guys 3 very, very simple tips, inshallah, and then we'll take questions that we can apply, right? So the first one, I was saying about what do we do to, when we replace screen time, right? What do we replace it with? At the dinner table, I've had a lot of teenagers come to me and complain and say, okay, fine, our dad makes us sit down, but we use that time for what? What did you do in school? How are your grades? How is this? How is that? Listen, you can be a parent any other time. This is the one time, let your children talk. Listen to them. Share stories with them. Make it a lighthearted discussion, right? Because we spend enough time disciplining, right? So use the time for sharing. Sharing and listening, right? If you can't read my handwriting, it's because they say that it's a sign of intelligence, poor handwriting. Anybody ever heard that before? Yeah. So they say that the brain is working faster than the hand, or the hand's working faster than the brain. I just made that excuse up. So if you can't read my handwriting, it's because I'm really intelligent. When there was one class I was teaching at the hospital, and somebody raised their hand and they were serious. They're like, "My handwriting is really good. What are you trying to say?" It's like, "Well, you're stupid." Right? Okay. So use that time for sharing and listening. One of the most powerful, when your child is going through something, what is one of the most powerful 2 words that you can say to a child going through, let's say, a breakup with a friend or struggling with school or something? You saying, you know what? I also struggle with this. Me too. Me too. It's one of the most powerful things. Me too. Like, when somebody comes to me with a certain struggle, like, I'm struggling with anxiety and this and that, and I share with my patients, I'm fairly open. I say, you know what, I struggle with this too. Like, wow, you? Like, yeah, me too. And all of a sudden they're like, subhanAllah, they don't feel as bad. Let's be a little bit vulnerable with our children from time to time. The Prophet ﷺ cried in front of his companions, right? He, ﷺ, when he was past his mother's grave years later, he started to cry, and he cried profusely. And he cried so much that these companions which loved him, ﷺ, they began to cry. And then finally one person asked, "Oh Rasulullah ﷺ, what makes you cry? Why are you crying so much?" He said, "This is the grave of my mother, and I just miss my mother." The Prophet ﷺ was vulnerable in front of children, vulnerable in front of his companions, and so they had a real connection. It wasn't a fake connection. Me too. Let your children hear that once in a while. Let your children know that you made mistakes as well, so they can use it against you. Okay, all right. The second thing is actually a very simple concept, actually. We know numerous hadith about saying salam, right? Can anybody give me a hadith about saying salam? There's many hadith about that. Give me a hadith. Huh? I'll finish it, yeah? Adkhul al-jannata bis-salam. Beautiful hadith, right? Beautiful hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he had a habit of when children were playing, right? So you imagine they're playing soccer or something, whatever, the children are running around. He would walk in the middle of the children and say, "Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh." The children were trained to stop and say salam and smile and then continue their play. One of these children was Anas radiallahu anhu, right? Anas radiallahu anhu, he had a very special connection with the Prophet ﷺ. He was one of the children around the Prophet ﷺ. His younger brother actually was we all know the famous story of the young boy which lost his pet bird, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he would often visit this young boy and say, "Ya Aba Umair, ma fa'ala an-nughair?" What happened to your pet bird? How is your pet bird? And so on. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ, who led an entire ummah, had the time to sit down with the boy and talk about his dead pet, right? And so this was the younger brother of Anas bin Malik. So this family had a very special connection with the Prophet ﷺ. Anas bin Malik was one of those kids. Allah Azza wa Jalla blessed Anas bin Malik to live until the age of 103. Do you know what Anas bin Malik used to do at the age of 103, almost 100 years later? When he saw children playing, what did he used to do? He would walk past them and he would say, "Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh." And all the kids would stop and smile. So people asked, "Why do you do this?" And he said, "The Prophet ﷺ used to do this when I used to play as a kid." Right? When we come home, are we greeting everybody with "Assalamu alaikum"? Are we looking them in the face? Are we smiling? This seems like a small thing, but because of this internet, because we're hidden behind a screen, there's internet bullying, there's this, there's that, we've lost basic etiquette, right? Our children will say anything. I mean, there's unfortunately been even suicides because of what was said on the internet, right? I'm sure some of you are aware of these cases, unfortunately, right? Cyberbullying and so on. We've lost all sensitivity. The Prophet ﷺ taught us that even, when you greet your brother, you shake their hands. And even if there's a tree between you two, and you cross that tree, you shake it again, right? I had a patient which was struggling with severe depression. And I was debating, I think we might need to start medication. And he came one day with this big smile on his face, right? And I said, "You look a lot happier today." He said, "Yeah, I was at the Plano Masjid, and this random uncle, he just came to me and he smiled at my face and he said, 'Assalamu alaikum.' And that made my day." And I was like, that was it? I went through 9 years of education. It just took that uncle to smile and say salam and you're cured of your depression. Well, he wasn't fully cured, but that made his day. Are we teaching our children this connection? Are we teaching our children to, talk nicely with other kids? Look them in the face, smile, right? It's a very simple concept, saying salam, right? Okay. And then finally, the last thing is age appropriate, or not appropriate. Age appropriate rules and restrictions, right? Age appropriate rules and restrictions. So the brother, which you said it very beautifully, that like when they become teenagers, be their friend, right? Obviously, you're still their parent. You still want to give them guidance and rules, right? But don't spend your entire, parenting years as a parent just chasing after rules and rules and rules and losing that. Look, I tell parents this. There's a big difference between a parent which tells their child, Don't run on the street, you're going to give me a heart attack, right? Is that child going to run on the street still? Probably, right? And they're going to remember, oh man, my parents used to get mad all the time, right? Versus a parent which says, don't run on the street, I love you so much, it would break my heart if you got hurt. Is the kid still going to run on the street? Probably. He'll still run on the street. But he's going to remember that. Just like the children around the Prophet ﷺ remembered that they did, these rules were placed on us because our parents loved us. It's a struggle. Wallahi, I know it is, right? I grew up most of my life. I came here in '87 from Pakistan. I went to public school. My high school was a school of 3,000 students. We were five Muslims. Yeah. Interestingly enough, Zakir Naik put that our school in front of 5 students. Yeah. Dr. Zakir Naik, if you guys are. Yeah. So anyway, we gave our parents, my brother and I, a lot of trouble. But because of the way that our parents approached it, mashallah, especially my father, we adore them now. This time will pass, right? And inshallah they will, but build that connection. As you're disciplining them, as you're setting these rules, build that connection. Take them out once in a while. If you have multiple kids, remember each kid is a little bit different. My father used to take each of us out alone once in a while, right? Even like once a month, take us out just one by one for dinner. How are you doing? How's everything going? Parents will come to me and say, SubhanAllah, I'm so worried. My child just said they like a girl in school. Or my child said that they saw something bad on the internet. And I say, I'm going to shake your hand because you're doing an amazing job as a parent. You know why? Because your child trusted you enough to share that with you. They could have hid it, right? Your child trusted you enough to share that with you. So our 15-year-old at home, she talks and she talks and she talks. Hopefully they won't read this recording. She's going to be embarrassed if she hears this recording. And we say, Alhamdulillah, right? Sometimes she talks too much, but she talks, and I'm glad she talks. Because if everything was a restriction, there would be a time where I would want her to talk, and I would say, how is school? Fine. How are your friends? I don't know. And you have no clue what's going on in their lives. I would rather be a little bit lenient and say, you know what, there's nothing you can't share with me. And so now, alhamdulillah, we know everything which is going on in your life. Right? Inshallah. Does that make sense? Okay. So we pray, inshallah, that Allah Azza wa Jal brings all of our hearts together as a community, helps us to be better parents, and helps us to be better spouses. And we make dua, رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَجَعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Okay, طيب, take some questions real quick. We have time for questions, or when's Iqamah? Iqamah's now? 7:45 is Iqamah? When's Isha? 8?
No, Iqamah. Adhan.
Oh, Iqamah 7:45, that's right. Okay, so Adhan's about to go off.
Adhan, yeah, I don't know when
They finished Adhan? Oh, we can't hear it from up here?
mic is off.
Oh, okay. All right, طيب, yeah, I'll just take like 1 or 2 questions and then...
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool. Yes, the sister, raise your hand first, yeah. Okay. Okay.
So the school provides them with the laptop. It's restricted, but still I don't believe kids are. We let them in his room.
Okay.
So I check on them. Is that okay? Or?
Yeah, usually school laptops, and you're a principal, you correct me if I'm, usually school laptops already have a lot of these, the software built in, correct?
And, well, yeah, it depends on the school. But
Okay.
the school provided laptops will be very limited
Mm-hmm.
in anything they can do. Generally speaking, depends on the school. But most schools, you can only go to certain web locations, even email and social media. A lot of things will be limited.
Okay. Yes?
How do you balance being a friend with your kids versus being friendly with your kids? If you get the difference, it's kind of a thin line, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Great question, right? So there's research has found different types of parenting styles, right? To just summarize, the best type of parenting style is something known as authoritative parenting style. Authoritative parenting style, right? There's authoritarian, there's negligent. So authoritative parenting is one where you give guidance, right? Children don't need just a best friend. You have to remember that they're not going to share everything with you all the time. They have their friends, right? You give them guidance, but the balance is what I mentioned before, that you give them the message that I am always here to listen to you. There's nothing that you can say or do, right? If you come openly and honestly to me, there's nothing you can say or do which is going to, make me so mad that you won't ever want to share anything again. That's the balance, inshallah. You know, you don't have to, like if your kid is doing Batamizi or something or talking to you like in Urdu, it's disrespectful to say like, you call an adult by their first name. It's actually even, my brother's, 2.5 years older than me only. I never called him by his first name. I call him Bhai. It's just, something, instill these rules in your kids. Don't tolerate that, right? You can set those rules, but at the same time, have this openness around this, that if you're in trouble, if you ever need to talk, I'm always there, inshallah. I think that's a pretty healthy balance. But don't be afraid to, discipline if you have to. That's
I always kind of struggle with that. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
You're friends with them, and then they say things like they say to you they are friends basically.
Yeah. 8 and 6, really, the way their brains are developing at that point, they need structure. 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, you know how they view the world? They view the world like this. Ahmed is a good boy, Ahmed is a bad boy. Baba is happy, Baba is mad. It's a very simple age, Teenagers are much more complicated, right?
Can I ask something?
Sure.
What's the difference between, like what you said, to friendly and a friend? How do you understand the difference?
Yeah, so the way my train of thought was that you want to be friendly with them, but not a friend at all times. In the sense that they should have the respect for elders and not treat you like a friend for everything. So I think that's what.
Yeah. I mean, be mindful as far as the language, as far as this, as far as, because then if kids get a little bit too loose with that, then, especially at 6 and 7, they shouldn't be arguing back about tasks, Because again, their objective is really kids at that age, it's a very masum, it's a very pure age. They crave attention. They crave approval, right? Teenagers could care less, right? And then when they become teenagers, that's when the idea of, sometimes parents confuse my child discussing something with me with disagreeing. Teenagers, they can discuss. If they ask why, let them ask why. It doesn't have to be in a disrespectful manner. I'd rather a child, I've had children, now they're adults, right, become atheist and leave Islam because they said that in 8th grade and 9th grade, I wondered, is there an Allah? But my parents were so strict on me about talking to girls, it would be like an atomic bomb explosion if I said, is there an Allah? So they kept this thought inside them, and they left the fold of Islam, unfortunately. So, yeah.
You talked about the physical aspects of that may stunt the growth, right? About taking alcohol or drugs.
Yeah.
What I was trying to find out was the environment in which they are growing. Would that stunt the growth? If a kid comes to me and then I'm always stopping
If it's an extreme environment, yes, right? So when we look at mental health, we look at something known as a biopsychosocial spiritual model. So there's a biological component, there's a social component, there's a psychological component, there's even research has found a spiritual component to it. So it's multiple factors. So sometimes if a child grows up in a severely abusive house, they will develop sometimes very severe actual physical problems. Selective mutism, where they can't actually speak, or sometimes bipolar or schizophrenia or a stutter or things like this, but it's a balance, right? And then sometimes it's scary. Like this is why we always ask Allah Azza wa Jal to preserve our children. Sometimes you can do everything right and they slip.
Okay, follow-up question.
Sure.
Twist it the other way.
Uh-huh.
Grow faster than how it should.
Does it grow faster than how it should? Like if they're in a good. I mean, yeah, definitely. So like, learning a musical instrument for for example, I'm not encouraging you learning, but this is what the research, there's certain areas of the brain, neural connections, which develop, which people don't. Or a better example, learning a second language.
I heard about a kid doing a surgery at 13 years old. He goes on LinkedIn and everywhere.
Okay.
So
Like, did he have a license or is he just random?
he didn't have a license. He was in an emergency.
Okay. I mean, yeah, some of it is genetic, so on. Some of it with addiction. By the way, the good thing is, except for maybe 1 or 2 specific drugs, if somebody, may Allah preserve us, like the cannabis addiction or so on, sustained abstinence repairs the brain. Our brain has an amazing ability. Allah has created it to be able to repair itself. With the right tools, with the right approach, and everything. So there's nothing except for one specific drug that I can think of which causes permanent damage. Yeah. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go on.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
What do I think? I mean, again, like, you know, honestly, like I have a 3-year-old when, like, as well. When I have a 3-year-old, by the time he becomes 7, I don't know how the technology is going to be at that point. I think that it's subjective. I can't, like I told you before, there's no specific research that shows that if your child has a phone at age 7, then he's destroyed it. It's on the parent as to how they utilize that. You know, are there going to be rules set? I think there should be restrictions, especially at an early age, just because of what I said about the age of exposure to pornography. Right? So there should be restrictions, but I have no problem giving a child a phone, right? With certain restrictions on it though. Even accidentally, I don't want that child to click something they shouldn't be clicking, right? That makes sense. Okay, I'm sorry, sister, yes. Yeah, sure.
حي على الفلاح.
No, here, how do you turn?
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله